and I'm honoured to be given the opportunity to serve as the 31st Prime Minister of Australia.
Australia has officially sworn in its 31st Prime Minister, with Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party officially taking power and defeating Scott Morrison and the Coalition. But there were many interesting themes that shone through with this election, from the rise of the independent Teals, to the impact of the Greens and the female vote, and of course, the focus on climate change. Welcome to your all-in-one election guide, where we will discuss what went down and what it means from a policy front, as well as what it means for Australia moving forward. Before we discuss all of the ins and the outs of the election that many have coined as Independence Day, it makes sense for us to take that step back and take stock of where things currently stand. As we can see here, Labor currently has 74 seats. As we all know, 76 seats is the magic number to form a majority government. Looking further down the line, we can see that the Coalition has 56 seats. Greens currently have 2 and may potentially grab a 3rd seat to make up what will be a big crossbench of up to 15. The question, of course, that continues to flow through is, will Labor secure a majority government? Or if not, how will they go navigating this big crossbench that has a progressive left-leaning focus? We know that there's likely to be a big drive towards climate policy on the back of what has been described as a climate election. Having a look at some of the primary vote numbers here, the Coalition had 35%. Labor has just above 32%. It's interesting reflecting back to 2019, where Labor recorded 33.3%, and it was considered a weaker result where they lost. The Greens had nearly 12% of the primary vote this year for the 2022 election, and Independents as a collective shared over 5%, which was up 3% from the last federal election. The ALP will be forming government with only around a third of the primary vote, and they are actually the first party to win government from the opposition with the declining primary vote. And so trying to make sense of some of the trends that we saw flow through this election. First and foremost was a trend that we saw with a swing away from the two major parties and towards the Greens and the Independents. We saw that climate change is an important issue to the Australian people, and they voted with their feet. This really drove a trend towards the left-leaning Teals as well as the Greens. As Greens Party leader Adam Bandt put it was a green slide. Of course, we saw the rise of the Teal Independents, which really was the story of this election. They campaigned as independents, but were supported by Climate 200. They took many of the inner city electorates by storm, often in areas that were considered safe Liberal strongholds. They campaigned on a number of key items such as climate change, integrity, and equality, with the female vote really being heard this federal election. The Teal Independents here will form part of this big crossbench, with up to 15 independents shining through. We also saw a large WA swing towards Labor, which ultimately could help it deliver a majority government. And we also saw a few major experienced Liberal MPs voted out, most notably Treasurer Josh Frydenberg in the Kooyong electorate. Potentially it looks like Peter Dutton could be next in line for the Liberal Party, but of course it's still very early on, and what will ultimately be a reshaped Liberal Party. Now when we're looking up ahead in terms of what are some of the implications and the changes that could be planned or to watch out for, we know that funding and spending, there are a lot of campaign promises. This goes across a range of different sectors, including aged care, housing, healthcare, of course the onshoring of manufacturing, which is a trend we've seen in nations around the world, as well as investment into innovation. There are, of course, questions about the deficits and taxes. There will be no answers on this in the short term. Of course, we'll have to wait to see how this is navigated, but it is something that economists and everyday Australians will continue to watch moving forward. Of course, we all know that with this federal election, top of the bill, front of mind, was this focus on cost of living. We're all familiar with the inflationary pressures now. Headline CPI figures in Australia was 5.1%. Trimmed mean inflation, which is the RBA's preferred measure, was at 3.7%. This is well above the 2 to 3% band that the RBA and other central banks around the world are aiming for. So this is going to be an important discussion that Labor government will have to continue to focus on. We saw Anthony Albanese at the start of his victory speech commit to, on behalf of the Labor Party, the Uluru Statement. If you're not familiar with the Uluru Statement, it is aimed to be a permanent forum of representation to be enshrined into the Constitution, from which First Nations can advocate for their people to the Parliament and government, which of course is going to be important, and it's great to see flowing through. There was also the campaign promise that everyone would be familiar with of a federal anti-corruption commission to be established by the end of 2022. And then the climate change discussion. We know that this is going to be a significant change, significant focus. The Teals and the Greens will be pushing for this as well. We know that the target set for 2030 as well as that net zero by 2050 are there. Rather than unpacking and discussing all of this in this video, I thought we could do a follow-up video where we dive into the climate change discussion, what it could mean for the electric vehicle sector moving forward in Australia. So if you haven't yet, make sure you've subscribed and turn your bell notifications on so you'll be updated when we do drop that video. And so you might be wondering, what happens next? First call of order, ticked off already. Anthony Albanese has officially been sworn in as the 31st Prime Minister. Of course, everyone will be watching for the cabinet selection, which will happen in the upcoming period. And Anthony Albanese is already off as part of his first official role to head off to the Quad meeting, which will be held in Tokyo, Japan. He'll be meeting with leaders from India, Japan, and of course, Joe Biden from the USA. And of course, the final vote will continue to have eager eyes on it as well. Eyes will be watching to see whether Labor will have enough to form a majority government or whether they'll have to be more collaborative. Either way, the Australian people have spoken, and it's likely to be a much more consultative parliament, whichever way the vote does land. We know that navigating inflation and this rising interest rate environment is going to be important. We've talked about it before. We're all familiar with the macroeconomic uncertainties that still persist, such as the lockdowns in China, uncertainties surrounding supply chains, of course the Ukraine situation and the implications for Europe, and the risks of global slowdown as monetary policy around the world tightens in a coordinated effort. Cost of living will still be front of centre, so this is going to be important as Labor does start to take power. Of course, naturally out of this as well, energy prices and this transition towards renewable energy. With a focus on climate change, you can anticipate that this will continue to be front and centre of the discussions moving forward.
Because I want every parent to be able to tell their child, no matter where you live or where you come from, in Australia, the doors of opportunity are open to us all.
I wanted to finish with this quote. We all know that politics can be divisive at times. However, no matter which side of the political spectrum that you sit, a nation where a kid can grow up from a single parent household in a housing estate in Camperdown to rise and become the leader of the country, that's a special nation. And so democracy, the opportunity to chase our dreams, it's something that we should never take for granted. I'd love to know your thoughts on it all, so drop in a comment below. Here are some other videos that you can check out, and a big thank you for joining us. For now, stay well, and happy investing.